This podcast series is brought to you by Elekanyani Ndlovu. For more details, visit elenndlovu.com.
My name is Elekanyani Ndlovu and welcome to Womanifesto. As women, we experience intersectional barriers in society that often result in others telling our stories for us. Womanifesto is about reclaiming our voices, experiences, and ideas and supporting one another in order to manifest them into a reality. Growing up, one of my favorite people was my uncle, and my uncle was a mathematics lecturer. And I remember thinking that sounds like such a cool thing to do. And I was always so curious about what it is he does. And I think it's probably my own interest in teaching and my desire to teach, or it is in admiring him and his work that I developed a desire to teach. I'm not sure which one came first. Unfortunately, my uncle passed away way back in 1997. I remember receiving the call and it rang and I answered the phone, and on the other side, this gentleman said to me, "Well, your uncle has passed away and he was in a car accident." And I was like, "Which uncle?" He says, your uncle. And then I remember thinking, no, surely you're not talking about my uncle. My uncle doesn't die. He's a mathematics lecturer. And I was just like, what did you just say? Can you say that again? And it was when he said it the second time that it hit me that he's actually reporting that my uncle was in a car accident and therefore he has passed on. And I have not thought about him as frequently as I had over the years, because I think with time you find a way to cope and you occupy your mind with other things instead of thinking about the loss itself. And recently I thought about him because a friend of mine introduced me to a professor, and I was very excited and curious to talk to a professor and also just, unpack what she does and how academia is, and, I suppose fulfill my own curiosity around what a career in academia would be like, a career in research. So I caught up with Professor Inglesi-Lotz. Professor Roula Inglesi-Lotz is an associate professor in the Department of Economics in the Faculty of Economics and Management Science at the University of Pretoria. She's done so many amazing things, and she's published more than 55 academic papers in peer-reviewed local and international journals. I have a desire to publish papers. I have co-authored 2 technical papers that were actually published and presented at a conference, and I did that as part of the work I was doing with the University of Johannesburg with supervising final year students for their engineering final year thesis programs. And I mean, it's still a to-do list. When I read that she has 55 academic papers, I was just like, oh my goodness, I have such a long way to go. But I mean, her research work has been based on energy, and she successfully supervises master's students, and a lot of them end up graduating cum laude. She's currently responsible for the research methodology course at honors level. She has developed a curriculum and currently teaches the first course of energy and environmental economics in the Department of Economics at UP. She's received several awards as a distinguished young woman researcher in the humanities and social science category, and she's affiliated with a number of bodies, including the South African Association for Energy Economics. She also does a lot of work around growing the awareness around science and the participation of women in science. She believes in role modeling. She is a member of the South African Young Academy of Science and a fellow of the Economic Society of South Africa. She's on a number of editorial panels for journals, and it was really exciting to talk to her. So one of the first things I asked her was how she ended up in academia and how, as an economist, she ended up doing work in the energy space. My interest in the energy space is because I have been in the energy space for all my career, actually, and that is a space that I engage with quite a bit, and I was curious to understand her journey in that. And one of the things she said was that she feels like academia chose her, and in fact that research chose her, but she enjoys the flexibility of the space and how she has a lot more control over her time. This got me thinking about the way we live our lives and the way we raise children and the way we are able to contribute to our working environment. How different would it be if we had flexibility of time and didn't necessarily have to have some of the very structured and stringent working conditions. And it was interesting to hear what she had to say about her own work and the choices and decisions that she's been able to make, and therefore being able to balance out her life on the basis of the flexibility of her work. And this is what she had to say about her work in academia.
And when you go into consulting in corporate, it feels to me that there's a structure, there's a framework that you fall into. While what I find in academia is this freedom of, to give you an example, the 2 years that I was pregnant with my kids in 2012 and 2014, I decided not to do any consulting. So any consulting opportunity, any technical report came my way, I said, no, can't do that. I'm pregnant. I want to do what needs to be done for my own work. I'm not going to do any extras. Again, with academia, you have this sense of control. If I was in corporate, I wouldn't be able to say, don't give me another report because I'm pregnant. You're there. That's what your job is about. So I think this sense of freedom works with my personality, that I'm also getting stressed very easy.
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought of it like that, actually, that you do have a sense of control and freedom over your work.
And I think as an employer, as a manager, as a leader, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is exactly that, how flexible environments should be and the impact of that on the business, the impact of that on the lives that are part of that environment and that business. I believe that research can help us to understand things. It gives us an opportunity to really collect the evidence and the data that we need for us to be able to process and analyze and therefore reach conclusions about things. And one of the things I was curious about with Prof was to understand her viewpoint around load shedding, especially because one of the reasons why she ended up researching energy is because as she was doing her master's, load shedding in this country had started, and half the time she would lose her own material, or she would not have saved and have to redo an entire assignment because electricity went off. So one of the things that I thought would be interesting to get as a view or an opinion from her as a researcher and as someone who does extensive research in energy was to just get her viewpoint around load shedding and her thoughts on that, what really caused load shedding. And obviously I'm curious about her understanding because I work in power and in energy, and it's interesting to just get viewpoints from different people and learn different perspectives and see if there's an angle or a view that you had not thought about that she may have. So I asked her a very simple yet very difficult question of, what does she think the root of load shedding is? And this is what she had to say.
So in many of my papers, we use load shedding as a given when we do modeling analysis. We use it as a factor that affects the demand or supply. Going on a mismatch of agendas, a mismatch of priorities, a misallocation of where resources are needed and what needs to be done. There's definitely an issue of management. And I'm not talking specific people, but in general, management of the business.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to even go into the big C, the corruption discussion, but I'm going into managing a company that needs to maximize its profits.
Yeah.
And this has happened because of the nature of the market, because of the monopolistic nature of the market, and the fact that the supplier is a state-owned company that provides electricity also as a public good up to a point, and needs to make sure that everybody, every citizen in the country can and should have access and should afford to buy electricity. So these two ideas of maximize profit for the best maintenance, the best functioning of a business, plus, or even just make profit, not only maximize. And on the other side, treating electricity as a right, as a public good. These two have clashed through the years. So decisions were made that were almost a trade-off between these two aims, between the aim of a functioning business and the aim of making sure all the citizens can have and should afford electricity. There are ways of sort of bringing the two together, but I think we haven't done that. I think it's this almost like conflicting management that might create this kind of problems and mismatches. The IRP being revised again and again through the years, with colleagues from abroad asking me, you revise your strategy so often, that's so very good of you. And I'm like, we don't revise our strategy. We don't have a formal strategy to implement yet. We revise it until it gets approved. This creates concerns with investors. All of these things together, plus the socioeconomic side of unpaid debts to ESCOM by municipalities or unpaid debt from consumers to municipalities, that creates extra financial burden to the system.
Yeah.
Illegal connections, infrastructure that gets damaged. All of these things are all parts of the same complex system that leads to problems.
Yeah, I suppose aging infrastructure as well.
That's for sure. That's for sure. I mean, we have power plants that need to be decommissioned or need to have been decommissioned already. And you have new power plants like Medupi and Kusile that should have been fully operational by now, and they are not fully operational by now. Not all units are in operation.
Last week I spoke at the Power and Electricity World Africa and the Solar Show of 2020. And one of the things that came up in that discussion was the role of women in this fourth industrial revolution and what our role would be in that. And one of the views I expressed is that our role is actually to ensure that women do continue to increase their numbers and critical mass and participation in the STEM fields, which is the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields. Because with the fear of us worrying about loss of jobs, it's interesting that there's research that shows that fields in STEM would actually not be impacted as much. If anything, the need for those types of disciplines and skills is likely to increase with the fourth industrial revolution. And if you look at the very small numbers of women participating, one of the things that we have to do is to ensure that we are advocating and continue to advocate. And it becomes an interesting dynamic, even for me as a woman, to be like, but we've been having this conversation for so long. Why does this conversation not change? And the reality is the conversation is changing and there's progress. It's just so small that in the bigger scheme of things, we still just have so much work to do in terms of making sure that there's representation. So it becomes very important for us as women to continue to have the conversation and the dialogue around subjects like science, which are probably not the most exciting of things to talk about, and still try and have that conversation about how we improve our numbers. And one of the things I talked to the prof about is the work that she does to support female participation in the field of science. And this is what she had to say about it.
I've been involved in a couple of projects with the South African Academy of Science, Global Academy, and I think my big thing there is role modeling. This is something that girls in science, young women in science do not have. If I think of What do they need? I think there's quite a lot of material online nowadays with what you need to do, and schools are empowering the girls, but they don't have somebody to say, I want to be like this one, or I want to go and listen to that person talking. We don't have this. We're stuck with that. And although there are many women in science at the moment, we don't do that as well. It's one extra thing that we don't do that consciously and intentionally. And I think that's something that I feel passionate about. And it goes back to my idea of doing something small and it can take it a long way. Examples can be, I went to a birthday party a couple of years ago of one of my son's friends, and the mom is also a scientist. And instead of buying any other present, I bought the little girl a scientist Barbie. And it's a small thing. It might sound funny, but just by making this a career option in a play, in a game for a little girl, makes a long way, because the little girls, they look at the Barbies and what jobs they have, the vet and the hairdresser and I don't know what else, but there was never an option of a scientist next to all of this. And it starts from small things like that. It starts from changing the way the girls see science. And I think that our schools are doing a good job. They don't focus science on the boys. The girls are doing excellent projects on science. Supporting organizations, that's also quite important. I support an organization called socioeconomic, and it's all about teaching young girls how to code. And it started with this very basic idea that I'm not a woman coder, but I'm a coder. I'm a programmer. I'm a scientist. I'm not a woman scientist. Yeah. And they're doing amazing work there. Just by being there and supporting these youngsters starting something, it's also important. We don't have to start new things the whole time.
One of the things I've been talking about a lot in the past episodes of Womanifesto is the fact that we can impact lives and that we can make a change, and that sometimes change does not have to be huge steps of change. It could just be the small things. It could be about you first, then the people around you, then you grow your sphere of influence and you impact in bigger ways. But the start doesn't have to be this monumental, world-changing, world-saving act. One of the simple things we can all do in our lives and that we can reflect on is to be a role model in the spaces that we're in, to actively be intentional about modeling the right type of behaviors, the right type of attitudes, and the right type of conversations and actions that can then move our society forward and challenge some of the norms that are barriers for us as women in science, as women in finance, as women in whatever space you might find yourself. My challenge to you is reflect on how you are being a role model. Reflect on how you are imparting the knowledge that you have, the experiences that you have, to someone next to you, to someone younger. And reflect on how you are learning from other role models and therefore growing and becoming better as a person. So my challenge to you this week is that you reflect on how you are being a role model.
I would love to hear from you. Please share your thoughts, ideas, and experiences with me on elendlovu.com or send an email to womanifesto@elendlovu.com. Until next week, thank you and God bless.